Hi everyone. This is me doing an unscheduled, well, it was scheduled, but unannounced live video. I'm joined by my good friend, well, now my good friend, I've called you my good friend, so by my friend, colleague, Rohini Ross. Rohini was someone who was, I've heard of you, I've known of you for quite some time, but we never really connected. I was introduced to you by my coach, Steve Chandler, and he suggested that we connect because I'm doing this immersion event in April about, aimed at powerful women, and he suggested that you're a powerful woman, and we had a few things in common, and we started having a very interesting discussion or conversation last week, which we didn't record. It was just we were just talking and connecting, and I got to the point where I was like, okay, let's stop talking because we need to record this, and so that's the point of this little live video today, where I wanted to just record whatever our discussion was, because I found it interesting, and I thought, well, at least some people would find it interesting on Facebook land. So for people, I guess, to start off with who don't know you, and I've got a page full of introduction about who you are and what you've done, but I think it's always better when people kind of talk about it themselves. So for people who don't know you and don't know who you are, could you tell us a little bit about who you are and maybe what's the background to you talking about power today?
Okay, thank you. So I live in Los Angeles and I work as a coach, trainer, and a therapist here. And in terms of the topic of powerful women, I guess I'm a woman, so that qualifies on that level. Really, I think that my own exploration, just my own personal development, has been a journey in finding myself and deepening my connection with who I am. And from that, there's an experience of being able to express myself more freely. And I think what goes along with that is also more powerfully in the world. So that's been my personal exploration with it. And it's something that I enjoy supporting my clients with as well.
Cool. So, and by the wonder of modern technology, we're connecting across continents in full Technicolor, showing my age. If people are watching this, I can see on the side that there's like a bunch of people watching us. Feel free to kind of say hello and give us a shout out and stuff like that. I think one of the cool things about having these videos live and us recording this live is that we can interact with people watching this, so it won't just be Rohini and I kind of waxing lyrical about whatever we think is interesting to us, or really want to make it relevant and valuable for people that's listening. So thank you for telling me a little bit about the work that you do and the women that you work with. Maybe a good place to start off with. Okay, we've got a first person saying hello. Hi, Ganesh Ridhi. What maybe first thing to start off with is, I'm going to assume, I might be wrong, I'm assuming that how you used to look at power and being a powerful woman, maybe, because I'm looking at my notes, you first got into coaching in 2004, so a fair number of years ago, and you were coached, should I say, first in 2004. How did you used to look at power and being a powerful woman back 13 years ago, and how do you look at it now? And I'm assuming there's going to be a shift during that time.
Yeah, there's really a different trajectory, and I wouldn't have said that I was, even when I first started being coached by Steve Chandler, your coach, I wasn't even I didn't have the audacity to even think about power. I was just wanting to feel good enough. So beyond good enough wasn't even in my comprehension at that point in time. So what I've noticed in terms of how the shifts occurred inside of me around all of that is that I dealt with a lot of feelings of insecurity and self-doubt. And I did, all kinds of therapy around that. And I finally got to the point where it's like, okay, this is good enough. I've just got to live my life. I can't keep analyzing and looking at this stuff. I've just got to live my life. And so at that point, I started working with Steve in relationship to development for the preschool that I was helping them with fundraising. And I loved what he was sharing. And I asked, if I could work with him personally. And so I started coaching with him. And that was really the first time that I saw that my ideas about who I needed to be, what I needed to do to be powerful, confident, feel secure were completely different than what I expected. I really was very externally, I was looking for all of that outside of myself at that time. And, went into coaching thinking, oh, that's going to help me find these things on the outside. And really what I got from it was to see that, oh, it's actually got nothing to do with what is outside of me. It's really about what's inside of me and what my relationship is with my own belief system, my own thoughts, whatever stories I'm telling myself. And so those started to crumble at that point in time. And that's when I started to feel more confident, more secure, more powerful, more free to be myself. And that's really the start of my journey. And it's just continued from there. Mm-hmm. Well, I was oriented to looking at all of those things. I wanted to have less conflict in my marriage. I wanted to have more money in my life. I wanted to have work that was more fulfilling to me. I wanted, all of those things that were external goals. I thought that I needed to work on the outside to achieve those goals, and that it was about me working harder, doing more, pushing myself, striving. Like somehow I thought that I was just not showing up in a way that needed to happen to achieve those goals. And that was just exhausting me. And I think I've always been someone who's fairly driven in life and willing to work hard. And so I couldn't understand, like, why I felt like I couldn't work harder. I felt like there wasn't really any energy left to do any more. But yet I was still like, okay, I'll do some coaching to try and figure this thing out. Maybe they can help me figure out how to work harder. And what shifted it was that I could see how my striving, how my pushing myself was really coming from a place of insecurity inside of me. And the fundamental belief system that I was operating from was that I wasn't good enough and that I needed to do more to prove my worthiness. And that is not a powerful position to stand in. It's a very painful position to live from. And as soon as I was able to see that the way that I was trying to improve my life was just reaffirming this understanding that I wasn't good enough, how could I create anything that I really wanted from that place? And it wasn't until I saw that fundamental piece was what was off base, not who I am, not what I was doing. And then to sort of shoot forward a little bit further down the road, sort of I took that and then I thought, oh, well, now I just need to get rid of my insecurity. Now, if I can just stop buying into my insecure thinking, then I'll feel fine. And that became my whole mission in life, is like, okay, I can eradicate insecurity from my life. And that's when I think I talked to you about it last week, where I had an experience where I was working with one of my mentors, Linda Pransky, and I really saw in my experience with her that my desire to eradicate insecurity, or the feeling of insecurity from my life, was really equal to trying to eradicate my humanity. That I wasn't going to be able to eradicate my humanity and couldn't I just accept that as a human being, I'm going to have all kinds of emotions and experiences, and that I don't need to worry about them. They don't need to mean anything about me. And it's okay to realize that when I'm in that place, I don't need to worry about it. And I can't find my happiness or well being in that place. But I'm going to come back to that. I'm going to rebalance naturally without effort on my part into the knowing of who I am, into my authentic self, however you want to describe that. And so that was a whole other layer of freedom that I finally saw, like, oh, all of me is fine. And I don't need to stop having certain human emotions in order to live the life that I want, to show up in the world the way that I want. So I just stopped taking all of that so seriously.
So one of the good things about having this live is when you make a mistake, people notice. So this time I am unmuted. So the last time I asked you a question, I wasn't, and everyone noticed. But I didn't want to interrupt your flow. So thank you for everyone for pointing that out to me. I am human myself, all right? And Rohini, I love what you're saying, because it's so aligns with my own experience, right? Like I used to feel like at the beginning there was, again, what you said before, it was almost how audacious could I have been to think that I could be powerful? And then moving from that to, oh, there are things that I can do, the small steps to just be okay. And then it was a case of now must remove, you called it all insecurities, but I would have said like weaknesses or like flaws, or to make myself the superhuman, which was incredibly stressful. And getting to the same place that you're talking about, although I have to remind myself of it, of course, from time to time, that it's all okay, and it's not about just having the good feelings and none of the bad feelings, right? Because that's what makes us human. And I think that's such an important thing, and it's why really part of I'm doing this event for women, because I realized I was doing events for men, and like, well, these are men's issues, and I'm talking to men, and I'm realizing more and more that no, this like we're talking to each other from different sides of the world, different backgrounds. You're a woman, I'm a man, and yet the experience that you talk about is one that I can so relate to. And it's so similar, to how I've seen it, and unfortunately, like you say, a lot of people can think that there's something wrong with it. There's something wrong with being upset or being angry. And I know in Michael Neill's latest book, you read a book and it's great, but there's certain things that stick out. The thing that sticks out for me is a story of the philosopher Sydney Banks, who many people will know. Who kind of was a founder of the Three Principles movement, who said, someone was asking him about, about anger, and they were having a conversation with these psychologists, and they were really not aligning. He didn't understand what they were saying, and eventually they said, "Don't you get angry?" And he said, "Of course I do." And they said, "Well, what do you do about it?" And he said, "Why on earth would I need to do anything?" And I remember I was sitting on the train reading that, and I burst out laughing, because I was like, oh, that's so, of course it's that way. And yet how many of us get caught up in that we shouldn't be feeling the certain way that we're feeling, and that's wrong, as opposed to, no, this is all part of the human experience, and those feelings and thoughts come and go as they do for all of us every single day, and what's underneath that is just sheer beauty and joy of being alive. And it's from that place that I guess on the topic of being a powerful woman, or just being a powerful human being, that's where our true power lies. And I feel that, and we talked about this last week, right, that I feel the greatest source, I don't know if that's the right word, of us losing our personal power is forgetting that, or and I do say forgetting it, because I think on one level we all know, I'm seeing this more and more, we all know this in bits and pieces in certain areas of our life, and there might be certain areas that we just forget it. Is that how you see it too?
Yeah, that's a great way of saying it, that we all have a knowing of this, and we just don't necessarily translate it into the other areas of our life. And so, for example, in my experience, when, I have two daughters who are teenagers now, but when I first became a mom, like I was so tuned in to that experience. I didn't have a lot of thinking about it. It felt very natural and innate. It felt beautiful. So in that area, I wasn't feeling insecure. It just made sense to me. But then in other areas of my life, about how to create my business, how to have money, like all of that, I had a ton of thinking about that and would stay in my personal thinking and make it meaningful and think that my feelings were important about that and just have this whole story about it that was not allowing me to experience what you're referring to as that beautiful feeling, that innate knowing, that internal genius, potential, however you want to call that. It was not allowing me to be as in touch with that inspiration. And that for me is where the most powerful experiences I have come when I'm less interested in myself. I'm less interested in my own idiosyncrasies in terms of what's going on with my thinking, and more just living in the moment and living from that place that you're talking about, living in alignment with it and creating from that place. And it doesn't necessarily occur to me to think that I'm powerful in that moment because I'm not really thinking about myself. But yet that's when I find that I'm showing up in a most impactful way in my life.
Yeah, I love that. I love it, and that's the kind of, I guess we're giving away the secret, right, of this. It's not really what I do and what you do, Rohini, is we're not helping people feel more powerful. I think what we're doing is we're reminding them that they are powerful already, and ironically, that kind of less is better, right? Like the less you try and think about it and try and make that happen, we tap into that innate sense of power. I just quickly looked at my notes from last week, and one of the things that we talked about was which really resonated with me, because this is exactly how I see it, was you talking about what stops women and men, to be fair, but what stops women from tapping into, and we can change the word from power to potential, right? Mm-hmm. Is believing some disempowering stories about themselves. And there's some thinking that they have which they ignore, because we all do. We have a thought, like, we ignore it. But there's some, for whatever reason, that they hold on to. So this is kind of going beyond, this was your experience, this is my experience. And what I'd like to flesh out is that this is something that is really a universal thing. And that universally, for anyone that's listening to this, they can tap into their potential or their power when they see that it's only their disempowering beliefs and thoughts that are holding them back.
Yeah, you're what you're speaking to is this is the human experience. And as human beings, we have a tendency to take our limiting beliefs to be true, to take them seriously, to find evidence that makes them look real, to think because we've thought that way for most of our lives that that's just how it is. Like there's not a real education about what thought is in our lives, whether it's with schools, whether it's just in our culture in general, that it's not really understood that what we experience comes from what we believe in the moment. And I was talking with someone recently, and they have experienced sort of extreme psychotic episode, and that was really obvious to them that was not, after the fact, that was not reality. But they were talking to me about how they felt not good enough, how they weren't motivated, how all this story about how they weren't okay. And I said, that's no different. You can see that other story that you created for yourself was not the truth, but you're not seeing that this is just another story that you're creating for yourself in the moment, and it's equally untrue. The challenge is that most people in your day-to-day life are not calling you out on this one. They called you out on the other one, but they're not calling you out on this one. And so it's like, and I think that's what it's like. We all live in these thought bubbles, and we think that that's reality, but it's not reality. And for me, if there's a feeling of disempowerment, a feeling of frustration, stress, unworthiness, like all of that to me is an indicator that the thought bubble that we're living in that moment is not true. And that the feeling that you described earlier, the beautiful feeling just ease, feeling happy, just feeling, good in the moment, that lets us know that that thought bubble that we're living in is at least closer to truth than the other one. But people don't tend to question the negative realities they create for themselves.
No, they don't. And as you're talking, I'm really feeling this and reminded of why I do what I do, and I'm sure why you do what you do, because it almost brings tears to my eyes, because I remember that like we talked about, this was so far away from my reality, and it was so complex, like life was complex, because I used to think about it too much, right? And I had no idea that it was so simple, that underneath all of that overthinking, underneath that misunderstanding of how my mind really works, was everything that I was looking for. And to me, it's so touching to be able to point people to their inner power, to their inner potential, to their inner spirit. I mean, to me, this is a bridge between spirituality, psychology, self-development, personal growth. It's all of that stuff, right? Rather than, I used to see them as discrete things, and I it means so much to me that I'm able to, and people like yourself are able to wake people up to that, and I feel so humbled by the fact that I stumbled across this, because I could have lived my life for another 40, 50, 60 years, whatever, really not understanding this, and having quite a miserable, or like, not miserable, but compared to how I see life now, so different, just so different. And we're getting comments here, from Mar Chandler Rolls, who's Steve's daughter. I love that. A ton of thinking, not fears. Thinking, just thoughts. And some other people commenting. If you guys have got questions, please do connect with us. But I hope people can hear what we're saying, and also hear a little bit deeper than that in terms of where we're coming from. Because one thing that I've been finding, that I've been saying recently to people, is this is not something that you don't know. This is not something that deep down is unknown to you. And I hopefully try and slow people down enough that they see the truth of this. Like you point out in that beautiful example of, well, you don't buy into this thinking, and people don't let you, right? But you buy into other thinking. It's like, imagine you've got a teenager, either your son or your nephew or whatever, and they've broken up with their first girlfriend. Oh, my life is over, right? And it looks really real to them, but we kind of all go, yeah, okay, don't worry, it's fine, right? And that's how we are. And then something else will happen, and we buy into it. And I know for me, sometimes what the danger is, that I see in the past, something would happen, and I would complain about it, and I would misunderstand it, and play the victim, and people would agree with me, and then I'm like, oh, but so this is true. And now what I find sometimes is something will happen, and very innocently people are trying to be helpful and supportive. They'll kind of, oh no, this is bad, and I have to realize, like, no, this really isn't, because it's not true. No matter how many people agree that something's bad, doesn't mean it is. And it's not even bad or good. It's about, just because like when people thought the world was flat, just because everyone thought the world was flat doesn't mean it's flat. So just because you might think you're a victim doesn't mean you're a victim, or if you feel you're powerless, that's simply not true.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And the simplicity of that is what I so appreciate, is that it's what you're saying, what I'm saying, it's not about working harder, it's not about doing more, it's not about learning something new. It's about remembering, as you said earlier, it's about remembering what you already know and seeing that as soon as something doesn't look true to you anymore, you don't have to do anything. You just let it go. And it's that understanding that we can look at our thoughts and see them as untrue. Some, like for me, I'll be in my negative thinking, I'll be in a low mood, and it will look absolutely real to me. But then at some point I wake up and realize, like, what am I doing? It's kind of like I shake my head. It's like I wake up and realize, no, that's not true. And we all have that capacity, and it doesn't require extra work on our part. It actually requires a letting go and a relaxing and a slowing down, as you said. And then it's so much easier to realize when we're getting sidetracked into these sort of delusional thoughts that, you know, unfortunately are not considered delusional by most of society. They're considered just what, you know, just normal. Yeah, of course you feel, you know, of course that's true. You are, you know, not this, not that. And it's like, no, that's not true. That's not the truth of who I am, but I can believe it. And it's that extra layer of also, for me, being okay with that I do get pulled into the negative feeling states by my thoughts. I know all of this, and yet that still happens to me, and I can still be okay because that resilience inside of me has me bounce back, and I wake up and I go, what was I thinking? And so there's no need to try and hold myself to some standard that isn't human, that isn't natural, that isn't authentic. I can just be myself, my human self, and I can know that I'm going to make mistakes, I'm going to screw up, I'm not going to act perfectly in my relationships, I'm not going to be perfect in my job, but that I can sort of rebalance from that and then, you know, do what's needed to clean it up afterwards. And for me, that level of like, oh, I can just be me and I'm enough, that to me is what allows me to tap into that potential that's inside of me. It feels paradoxical in a sense because, like, what I'm saying is just ordinary little old me that's got all of these imperfections is enough, but yet that's what allows me to feel that deeper part of myself that isn't just my individual identity. It's that part that is the soup of all humanity and, you know, that spiritual nature that you're talking about. And it's like, that feels really good, but I don't get there when I'm caught up in my ego, trying to look good, trying to present well, trying to get it right, trying to work harder. I have much less connection with that part of myself when I'm in that role playing. And so where, you know, to go back to that question at the beginning, in terms of that arc, it's like, I thought it was all about that was going to get me to all of the things that I wanted. And it was really in letting all of that go that I just dropped into who I am, just ordinary me, realizing I'm enough. And that's what opened up my connection to that potential much more deeply inside of me. So it's like, wow, who would have thought that?
Yeah, I love that, and I'm loving how we're completely on that, which is why I'm so glad that we kind of stopped last week so we could carry on where we left off and just completely, hopefully, bounce off each other. One of the things that just occurred to me as you were talking, again coming back to the I guess the context and topic of being powerful, was one area that I used to think, or one area that I see looking back, I wasn't, and I'm going to use these words, showing up as powerfully as I could, was in the realms of my interactions with other people, and I'm sure this may be an area for both men and women, is that it can look like certain people cause us to feel a certain way. And I was talking to one of my mentors, a guy called Dr. Dickin Battinger, about a week or two ago, and we were laughing about this, where he said, you know, first of all, we were talking about how no one can make you feel anything because your feelings are a reflection of your thinking moment to moment. And then he said, which really stuck out for me, was, can you imagine if we could make people feel things, right? And he goes, imagine we could go around like giving people feelings, right? Like that would be an awesome superpower, right? Like, oh, I'm going to make you feel good. I'm going to make you feel scared. I'm going to make you feel bad. But, you know, that would be a superhero, right? Like, could manipulate people with emotions, but we can't. We really, really can't. And I used to think people could, right? And I used to feel I had no choice in it. And I realized very early on that when I started to see this, not completely, but when I started to get a glimpse of this, that, oh, okay, if I'm just feeling my own thinking moment to moment, then no one can make me feel anything that I don't think, and no one can control my thinking. And that's a much more powerful place to come from, not as a mindset, but as a, it's kind of like a side effect. It's like, oh, that just makes sense. And so I'm no longer a victim of how someone treats me or what they say or what they do, and a victim to my emotions, but really seeing that that's completely separate. And this works both ways. This works both positively and negatively. I don't know, Rohini, if you've ever had the experience where you've wanted to do something nice for someone, or to give a surprise, or make someone happy, right? And then they've seen it and they're like, oh my god, that's terrible, right? Like we can't do that. And I don't know what your thoughts are on that in the realms of or the context of power.
Well, gosh, I think relationship has been my biggest teacher in this area. And my marriage with my husband, Angus, has been, my biggest learning curve around this. It's been my greatest gift. And at times I thought it was my greatest torture, which, he's probably sick of me talking about this. But, for what you're saying in terms of people can't make us feel a certain way. Well, I didn't think that was true. I was absolutely certain that his anger made me feel bad, and his anger was wrong because it made me feel bad, and that it wasn't acceptable that he got angry as much as he did, because I felt so bad all the time. And, just that sort of perpetual cycle of judgment and, just was not good, as you can imagine, for our relationship. And so, Steve Chandler heard me talk about this. He's like, read the relationship handbook. And I started to sort of get a clue, like, oh, maybe my feelings aren't coming from my husband. And it took me, I was a slow learner in this department. And, finally, I got it. I saw that his anger was not responsible for my hurt. I saw that his anger was a reflection of his suffering in the moment, and that it had nothing to do with me. And it wasn't until I saw that I was able to stop taking it personally. And when I took it personally, it was very painful and would result in lots of arguments and fights and not good behavior on our part. But as soon as I was able, and I'm not saying I can do this all the time, but much more often, as soon as I'm able to see that his experience, even if he's saying things to me about me, is got nothing to do with me, that's just a reflection of him being in his own suffering, and I actually can feel okay while that's happening, that was freedom. That was powerful, but not powerful in a up-down hierarchical power way. Powerful in the sense of I can be okay, independent of what's going on around me. And other people's anger was something that I didn't feel that I could be okay if that was going on around me. And I went to great lengths to avoid that, other than, of course, picking the husband that I married. But, that was perfect for my learning. And amazingly, as soon as I got that, well, our fighting, it just completely diminished, because I was no longer judging him as not good enough. I was no longer judging him as not a good husband. I wasn't sort of on my high horse about, his temper. I was just like, oh, he's human. He has feelings. That's okay. I have room for that. He certainly has room for my feelings. So it was, I cannot get over how blind I was in that area now. But the truth is, I just couldn't see it. And it took a while for me to sort of wake up to that in that area.
I had a client conversation recently, and you're reminding me of this, that I had a client conversation with someone who was struggling with their partner, and it just suddenly occurred to me. I said, how would you want your ideal partner to be? You know, like how we think our partners cause us to feel a certain thing. I was like, well, what would you want your partner to be like? And you know, on in terms of how they interact with you. And as we discussed it, so we kind of found that I was like, so you want them to be really loving towards you. Yeah, I want my partner to be really loving towards me. Okay. And you know you're not perfect. Oh yeah, I know I'm not perfect. So when you're not perfect and maybe you act out a bit or you're a bit grumpy or whatever else, you want them to be really understanding. Yeah, I want them to be really understanding. Okay. So you want someone who's really, really loving towards you and very accepting and accepting of you when you have your bad days, right? Or your bad moments. Yeah. Okay. How do you act with your partner? And it was like, oh, yeah, I don't do that. When my partner's in a bad mood or something, no, I don't do that. And it was kind of like, oh. And the cool thing for me is then going deeper than that is like, this is not a doing. But when you see exactly what you're talking about, that okay, our feelings aren't coming from our partner, he's not making me feel bad, she's not making me upset, then we can, like, it's a natural next step. Then it's just logical that we are more loving and we are more accepting, right? So I'm guessing if your partner's angry and you think that makes you feel bad, it's really hard to accept that. It's like a lot harder than your partner's angry and he or she's just angry, right? It's got nothing to do with me. It makes it so much easier for us to be better partners. And kind of paradoxically, the more we see that, the more that our partners change, right? Like, or certainly what I've seen, and it's not even just partners, it's any relationship. You know, and it's funny sometimes, I don't know if you have this, I'll say things to clients, whatever, and I've never said it before, and I'm like, yeah, that's a really good lesson for me too. Like, good one to remember.
That's a perk of the job.
Yeah, it's certainly. I remember Garrett Kramer saying, he was one of the first people I came across that was sharing this kind of work with me, and he'd just written a book, and he would say that his son or daughter would say to him, "Dad, you need to read your book. Dad, you need to go and read your book." So this is and sometimes my wife will say to me, like, "Honey, isn't this what you teach people? Like, shouldn't you go and like think about what you tell others?" But it's really cool because I think that, again, it comes back to us being human, and us, you know, we all forget this because when we're having an off day, when we're caught out, right, which we all do, and none of us are superhuman. Again, it's for me, the other piece to this is being loving towards our partners and understanding. But the really big thing for me is in the last few months, and maybe I am a slow learner, I feel, but the thing for me in the last few months is taking that same approach to myself. And I find, this is not true, it's not a truth, but it's something I've noticed, and I might be wrong. I find that women really can put a lot of pressure on themselves in their roles as wives and mothers and daughters and whatever, is trying to please everyone else. And the few women that I work with are kind of sometimes have to point that out, that you know, that love and understanding, you know, that can apply to yourself too.
Yeah, I think that sort of wanting to please others is usually, in my experience, and I would have fallen into that category, was very much about self-preservation. So in a sense, and I'll speak to my own experience with it, it was coming from a selfish place inside of myself, because I thought, in order for me to be okay, I need everybody else to be happy outside of me. And so that was my strategy of having sort of an easy life, a comfortable life, a life where I didn't have to deal with conflict. But it was also one in which I was exhausted, not honoring myself, not in tune with really what is going on in the here and now, more in tune with my story about what's going on than living life in the moment. And when I saw that my well-being, my peace of mind has nothing to do with anyone outside of me, then that's when I was able to sort of drop that coping mechanism, because that's all it was, is a coping mechanism to try and get by. And as a coping mechanism, my other, maybe related to that, is my coping mechanism of trying to be perfect. Like I was driven by my desire to never get things wrong. You know, that was just, I did not have room for that in my life. And that allowed me to lead a very narrow existence, because I could only do what I was good at. And this started when I was really young. Like in school, I wouldn't do any of the art classes because I didn't want to do them, because I didn't think I'd get an A in them, because I wasn't any good at art. So it's like, it's a really narrow experience of life if I'm not allowed to step outside of the line, screw up, fall over. And of course I did. So I'm still doing that in this really narrow life. And what happened was, it's like those lines fell away. And now it's like everything's an option. The potential is there. And because I don't have to be good at anything to do it, I can just do it and have the experience of it and learn from it. And if it's a complete flop, it's a complete flop. But that's not what's important. What's important is for me to listen to what I'm called forward to do, and to not be listening to the ideas about what's going to help me feel okay. Like that's the shift in the orientation inside of myself. Rather than before, I wasn't listening to what I was called to do. I was in my head trying to figure out how to keep everything outside of me okay. And it was really exhausting. I was burnt out. And as soon as I let that go, then all of a sudden I realized, hey, there's information that I'm getting from inside of myself that's saying, what about this? What about that? And that feels really fun and joyful to listen to. And it doesn't mean that it's going to be a complete success or that I'm going to look good from doing it, but it's just what I want to do. And for whatever reason, that's what it is. And I don't have to put all the dots together to know why it's important or why it's meaningful, but I can live my life much more from that place and have a lot more fun and grow a lot more and experience a lot more than I was before.
You know, I love that. One of the questions, I'm sure you get asked this too, but one of the questions I get asked, or conversations I sometimes have is, I don't know what my purpose is. I don't know what I want to do, and what you remind me of is that everyone has. You said you're really narrow focus, and everyone has a different flavor of that. Right, so for someone it's like I can only do something that I do really well. For someone else it'd be like I can only do something that's going to make me money, or I can only do something that people approve of. You know, people have their own flavors of this, and for me, what I find is two things that in terms of what we're pointing to. One, when we drop our misunderstandings about that if I do well I'll feel good, or if I don't do well I'll feel bad, or if people approve it'll be good, if they don't approve, that's going to cause me to feel something, or whatever misunderstanding about our flavor that keeps us narrow. Once we drop that kind of narrow focus opens up, and we're opened up to all the different potential and possibilities that life has, which are unlimited, right? I remember 10 years ago wanting to start my own business and thinking, oh, everything's already been invented, there's no more good, there's nothing I can do, and there was all these limited options. And now I look back from a different perspective and see, oh my god, there was just so much choice. How did I not see that? So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is that I was talking to someone last night about this, and they were saying, he was going, I don't know what to do with my life, and I want to do something different. I don't enjoy my job, but I don't know what to do. And he was working like 60 hours a week, and constantly. And then when not working, just it was always on the go. And if we don't give ourselves that quiet time to see this, to see the truth of what you and I are pointing to, when we're constantly on the go, either physically or just mentally constantly on the go, then we're missing out on that. And I don't know how you see that, but certainly I see those two things, and really the silence really follows the first thing. It's kind of again a side effect of the first thing, but if we're constantly thinking and we've got misunderstanding and we're not having any space, and we're not really going to be able to follow what it is that we really want to do.
Yeah, there's. I think it was George Pransky that used the term, living life like you're double parked. I think a lot of people live life like they're double parked, and I know that I did, and it's internally generated. People think they're living life at that pace because they have to, because it's what their job demands of them, what their family demands of them, what life demands of them on some level. And it isn't seen that, no, that's something that's self-generated. It's an internal pressure. It's not actually an external pressure. And what I see a lot in terms of the executive coaching work that I do, or even personal coaching, is that people have this idea that if they slow down, their performance is going to suffer. And, I was working with a CEO of a company, and she has just lived life like she is double parked. And when I really sort of dug a little deeper to find out, well, how does that make sense to you? Because you're telling me all these reasons why you don't want to do that, but yet you're doing it. Why? And she said, well, I need to do that to be successful. And that's where I'm like, oh, well, no wonder you're doing it. But let me tell you, your success and performance has got nothing to do with that, because if you work in that way, if you live life like that, your performance doesn't increase, it decreases. You're not able to have the level of focus. You're not able to have the level of clarity. And, we just had a conversation about how performance is not about pressure. And you look at athletes, and you can see that if you put pressure on athletes, there's an immediate impact on results that isn't good. And really, if you look at every area of life, when we put pressure on ourselves, we don't get the best performance. And I said, well, what would happen if you treated your employees that way? How would they perform? And she's like, oh, no, they wouldn't perform well. And I'm like, yeah, you do it to yourself? Like, that doesn't make sense. So I think that's a great point that you're making about that. The pressure, it's internal, and it's a misunderstanding that I see, that people just think it's a requirement in order to do well in their life, and they don't really see that the opposite is what occurs from that.
Yeah, and like you say, it doesn't make sense once we see it, and I'm sure you and I have had moments like that where we go, how did I not see that before? Well, the time's flown by, Rohini. We're going to probably have to end it there, but thank you so much. I know we could have carried on talking probably for another hour or two and just kept going, and I know we're both very passionate about this topic, and just thank you so much for spending time with me. If people want to find out more about you and want to connect with you, how can they do that?
They can go to my website, rohiniross.com. So that's my name, ROHINIROSS.com.
Fantastic. I've put a little link to the Powerful Women's Group, or Powerful Women's Immersion link on this video. So if people want to check it out, there's a little bit of information. There are a couple of videos there, but ultimately if people want to find out more, you can't buy a ticket. You got to send me a contact me thing. That's how I like to do things, so do that. And whether you come or not, I hope you've really enjoyed this conversation with Rohini, and you've got some value from it. Thanks everyone for listening.
Thanks for having me.